So in 2022, I finally played Graveyard Keeper for the first time, and spoiler alert, it's actually really good. And I'm gonna use this video to tell you why. Now I know I sounded surprised when I said it was good, but to be honest, I never actually thought I'd play it. I mean, that title alone, Graveyard Keeper, it put me off a bit. And then the description of it being a medieval graveyard simulation, it didn't sound all that appealing. You know, the idea of burying people, the simulation of doing that. Now I know on the website the developers say it's designed to be the most inaccurate graveyard sim, and I was well aware that it had a darkly comic tone, but honestly, I just didn't fancy tending to the dead in a game. And I need to say that even though I'm now playing it in 2022, it's not like I've just discovered it, because I've been well aware of this game since it released in 2018, as it was always popping up on those lists of top 10 alternatives to Stardew Valley. Now, other games that I love, like Slime Rancher and My Time at Portia, are often on those lists as well, so on that basis alone, I knew that if it was like Stardew Valley, I'd probably really enjoy Graveyard Keeper, which, to be honest, is probably a bit of a dangerous mindset for me to have. It's kind of like going on a date with somebody new, hoping that they do all of the things you loved about your ex in the same way, but with none of the downsides. And for me, Stardew Valley is pretty much perfect, and I think if you go into Graveyard Keeper hoping for Stardew Valley with a different story, then honestly, I think you're going to be a bit disappointed. And yes, it does have many similar traits. I mean, gorgeous graphics in stunning pixel art, although to be honest I think it's got a bit of a darker palette. Then there's that awesome soundtrack which sets the mood, and in terms of things you do, there's farming, fishing, mining, crafting. Then on top of that there are NPCs that have routines based on days, there's a day and night cycle, there's dungeon crawling, and a lot about the game loop is pretty similar. In fact, I've heard some people go as far as to call it Stardew Valley's evil twin, but for me, that's unfair. Now, first of all, there is nothing wrong with two games being similar. Two games can exist in the same universe and both be awesome. But to be honest, I think that Graveyard Keeper is very much its own game which chooses to do its own thing, and what makes Graveyard Keeper hit different is its sense of freedom and lack of real punishment, which in turn make this a beautifully paced game that is so much more than just a Stardew Valley clone. So, after all that negativity and prejudice towards the title, I mean, how did I end up discovering how wrong my preconceptions were? Well, a friend mentioned that he'd bought it and he was massively enjoying it, and I guess I had a feeling of FOMO, because he's basically someone who likes all the same games as me. Cheers Beardy for putting me onto this one. So I took a look on Steam and there it was for just over £3, which is a bargain. I thought if I don't like it, nothing really lost. But then I also did something that I never normally do. I noticed that 2 out of the 3 paid DLC were just over £1. So I bought them too. I didn't splash out on the latest DLC as it was full price and it would have been more expensive than the rest put together. Now, Graveyard Keeper has had 3 pieces of paid DLC, the last coming out in October 2021, and 1 piece of free DLC. Now, normally I only buy DLC if I've played the base game to hell, and even then I only buy it if I'm really enjoying the base game. But I thought, what the hell? It's not that expensive, and to be honest, in hindsight, I'm really glad that I did. And talking about that hindsight, I think the fact that I experienced this game for the first time over 3 years after it released in 2018, along with the DLC, is honestly really significant, because back when it first came out, it was greeted with a slew of reviews giving it 6s and 7s. In fact, it still has a Metacritic score on the PC of 69. But playing it now in 2022, I honestly get the feeling that this game is now critically underrated. Those 6s are way too low. However, once you really get into the game and start to look past what the post-release content has added, then I can kind of see where those reviewers who gave it 7s back in the day were coming from. And yeah, there are still some issues to this day that possibly need addressing, and others that have been fixed since 2018. And I will be talking about that through this video. But first, I want to talk about what makes Graveyard Keeper special in my opinion. And I mentioned in the intro, it's about freedom, pacing, and lack of punishment. I think that one of the best things Graveyard Keeper introduces is its take on time. The game loop is based on a 6-day cycle. Each day is represented by a symbol on a wheel in the top left of your screen. Specific things in the game happen only on specific days. For example, Certain characters you need to speak to continue quests appear on 1 day a week. Or another example is once a week when you open up the church you need to hold a sermon. The thing is though, if you miss the opportunity to speak to the person because you get, sidetracked doing something else in the game, it is not overly punishing. You only have to wait 5 more days and nights to speak to them again, and in terms of playtime that's not too long. In stark contrast, Stardew Valley has a seasonal approach, which, it makes perfect sense due to its stronger emphasis on farming. But in that, when you're trying to fix up the community centre, certain bundles like the crops need to be done in specific seasons. If you fail to complete the summer foods bundle, for example, you have to wait a whole 3 seasons, which in terms of playtime is quite a long time and is far more punishing. Graveyard Keeper's lack of rigidity gives it a sense of freedom. There is very little pressure to do things when the game wants you to actually do it. There's no birthdays to remember, no orders to fill in specific time limits, and if you don't fancy continuing the quest right that second, and you just want to fill your time opening up the tech tree or chopping down trees for days on end, you can, with no real repercussions. You can effectively play this game at your own pace. And there are so many ways to get sidetracked in this game. Sprawling quest lines, chopping down trees, planting crops and growing food, mining, crafting new equipment, fishing, burying, cremating or resurrecting corpses, performing autopsies, going into dungeons, holding church sermons, and so on. In fact, if I'm honest, for a game called Graveyard Keeper, I spent quite a considerable amount of time forgetting that I had to look after a cemetery because this game has got so much going on. And that lack of rigidity extends to when you do things. There is a day and night cycle, but you can do what you want when you want. Fancy burying bodies in the middle of the night? Yeah, well, you can. Chop down trees in the early morning? Yeah, no problem. You don't have to be in bed by a specific time like a good little boy. And if you work too long or die in the dungeons, you simply awaken your house with all your stuff. No punishment. And again, this allowed me to take the game at my own pace, and I loved it for it. I suppose the only time pressure thing, if you can call it that, is that the bodies deteriorate and you have to perform autopsies and bury the bodies before they're too far gone. But then, if you don't want to deal with bodies for a while, all you need to do is stop putting carrots in a box, which means that the narky communist talking donkey stops delivering new corpses until he gets fed. And I think that comment just then, narky communist talking donkey, probably gives you an idea of the dark comic undertone of this game. I'm not going to ruin the story, I'm not going to be one of those people, but after you've first become the new Graveyard Keeper, you meet a talking, hard-drinking skull who sets you on your way and then offers info in exchange for booze. Then there's a nonchalant bishop who tasks you with making your graveyard look pretty. I'm not quite sure that pretty is the right word, but, well, it's a place that you would want to be seen dead in. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Soon after that, you're talking to astrologers, inquisitors and poets, you're holding sermons in your church to gain resources that allows you to study things, and you're trading honey with homeless people. Now while it sounds a little bit like something Terry Pratchett might have written, I wouldn't say it's as funny as Discworld, but it's certainly darkly comic. Now, I accept that some of the things you do in this game, like chucking bodies in the river or harvesting flesh from corpses to turn them into burgers, yeah, you kinda do that. I mean, it could be edging on the side of indecent, but it is all tongue-in-cheek. But I think that point about improving your churchyard highlights something that Graveyard Keeper also does really well. At no point was I unsure why I was doing something. Now, some games you know what you have to do and you just kind of get on with it. But for example, with the churchyard, I had to improve it so that I could open up the church and start holding church sermons. This in turn would give me money and sermon points that I could use for research. That research would then give me different coloured experience points, which mean I could open up more of the tech tree. Then you also need to decorate and improve your church to get more sermon points and more money. Then there were the bodies. You perform autopsies to harvest things that you need. Resources like fat for candles or flesh for food. Removing things can improve the sin level of the body, which in turn when buried is better for the quality of your cemetery. But not do a good job because you haven't opened up enough of the tech tree is detrimental, and you'll end up having to burn them. Now, I know at times there was a carrot and stick approach, but this really kept me going. And probably from what I've just said, you really know why I love this game. But I know at the start I said that I started to understand why, back in the day, some reviewers had given it 7s, and I think a lot of those issues have been resolved, but there are some others that still need looking at. So what's been fixed? Well, firstly, some of the people that you need to speak to are a long way away, and when the game first came out, there was no real fast travel system. And considering that some people only appear on specific days, it would have been infuriating to travel all the way and to miss them. Since then, a portal stone has been added which allows you to jump to specific points around the map. Another thing is, I think since its release, a sense of progression has really been added, mostly in the area of resource management. You are always after resources, and in the early stages, you are constantly chopping down trees, planting food and cutting stone. Back in the day, I imagined that after a while, trying to constantly chase resources for the entirety of the game you need became overwhelming, distracting and possibly a little bit mundane. Since then, a free DLC has launched which added zombies that you can open up later on the tech tree, which means that you can resurrect corpses to create workers and effectively automate your resource management. This frees you up to do other things, which, as I said, it adds a massive feeling of progression as you no longer have to engage in those early tasks if you don't want to. Now, as I mentioned, the first DLC was free to anyone who owned the base game, and it was called Breaking Dead and effectively completed the experience. It kind of became the game that it should have been when it released, which is why I believe it was free. An area though that I still don't think has been fixed is, at times, there seems to be a lack of intuition. Now, for example, you need water as a resource. You can get buckets of water from the well, but when you go to create an item that needs water, it says you're missing water. You then click on the resource on the crafting page, and it says that you need to construct it on a table, which you need to open up on the tech tree. I did that, I created the table, and it still didn't seem to work. I eventually had to resort to a wiki which told me I had to right click on the bucket in my inventory and click use. That made no sense to me. Maybe it was an oversight that was left in, but this is just one example and there were others too. I suppose the takeaway point here is that 3 years later, there is now a comprehensive wiki. And while honestly I think it's a bit of bad design that you have to read up to work out how to do basic tasks, I mean more complex tasks I understand, I suppose what I'm saying is it's there if you need it. The last thing that annoyed me a little bit at times was to do with the tech tree. Now, in terms of experience points, there are 3 types. Red, which comes from manual labour, green from agriculture, and blue from kind of more scientific and spiritual work. And you use these points to unlock items on the tech tree. There are several different areas of research to open up, but the thing is, things always seem very reliant on something else, so when you open up a new tech, it sometimes doesn't work without you doing something else first. For example, I opened up stained glass windows to improve my church, but it turns out I needed another tech. I needed to make jewellery, but to make jewellery I needed gold, which meant another tech, and to mine gold I needed another tech. And that was just frustrating as it always felt like I had to unlock something else to make what I wanted work. And I was always chasing something new. Now, I get the idea that the tech tree is there to improve progression, but on my first playthrough, I felt like instead of progress, I was just going around in circles. I suppose second playthrough, you have more idea of what needs opening up first, so, I don't know, positively maybe it adds replayability. Now, I know I sounded a little bit negative there, but most of the things have been fixed and there are workarounds such as wikis, and as for the tech tree, I suppose it's just more to unlock, so there's more of a challenge, and that's the way I ended up seeing it. Because, as I said, there is so much to love in this game. At no point will you get bored, disemboweling bodies, chopping down trees, running errands, later on there's studying stuff, fishing, mining, raising the dead, and you always seem to be researching and making money, which is probably why the communist donkey hates you so much. You sell produce from the farm, you sell corpses' flesh, and there is so much to do without the paid DLC. But 3 years on, and that DLC has added so much more to do in between those main quests. It's not free, but it adds a lot, and it makes an already stunning world bigger. Each of them add around 6 to 12 hours. The first, Stranger Sins, was released in October 2019, and it expands the game's backstory and characters. The DLC also introduces your own tavern to run, and it adds personalities to many of the previously silent villagers through a quest. Paid DLC number 2 continued the theme of parody of names with Game of Crone, and was released in October 2020, and it included much more story content. You help some refugees from the Inquisition, and you go vampire hunting, and then the donkey, he wants you to help you with his plan to start a communist revolution. Finally, the last DLC is called Better Save Soul. It opened up a new room, there's remote crafting control which you can do through the map, and there was also a new quest which added 6 to 12 hours. As I said, I only bought the first 2 DLC, so I don't really have a massive opinion on the third one, but the first 2 DLC just added so much more to do, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can say this point that probably when that DLC, Better Save Soul, is on sale, I'm probably also going to splash out. And there you have it, Graveyard Keeper. Is it perfect? No. Is it a Stardew Valley killer? No. But it is very much its own game that chooses to do its own things, and I absolutely love it. Graveyard Keeper is an addictive, fun and intriguing game with so much to do, and the balance it now has with the DLC and added content means that you can really enjoy the freedom it offers for you to play the game at your own pace. I loved it. A game I am really glad that I missed till now, as I might not have loved it as much when it got those 6s and 7s. If you already own it, maybe you could dust it off, especially if you miss the zombies. And if you're looking for something new, well, take a closer look, because this is a game that I recommend. And if you have an indie game that you recommend that I take a closer look at, do hit me up in the comments, and please drop me a like, because it really helps me out. But from me today, all it leaves me to say is thank you very much for watching, and this is Roy McCoy, out!